Hello, Neil Graham with Phoenix Rising here. This particular video is specific to first and second grade coaches and what is involved in coaching those age groups. First of all, this will be sent to you as a PDF document so you can kind of review it in more detail. Feel free to look at it as we go through this video. I'll not read everything up on the screen here, and it might be a little tricky for you to read on the video. But the first slide talks about the general characteristics of these kids who tend to be 6-7 years old. And much like we talk to the kindergarten kids coaches and talk about a lack of attention span, the first and second graders are at this point only a little better in that respect. They still have a pretty short attention span, which is something to keep in mind. If you try and give them too information at one time, you're likely to lose them and they'll switch off. So try and keep things short and sweet when you are talking to them. At this age, they tend to be very sensitive young children who need a lot of encouragement, a lot of praise, and really thrive on positive coaching. So they're still quite fragile psychologically. That's definitely something that you need to keep in mind when you're coaching this age group to really maximize the enjoyment and get the best out of those kids. At this age, they still have that there's no sense of pacing themselves in a game or practice. They're just going to go flat out until they're done. Then they need a little breather, and then they get up and they recharge and they go again. So something to keep in mind. When it comes to playing games, you're going to get a mix of kids who are starting to understand the sense of a team shape. Maybe it's a little diamond, you're playing a 4v4, one's a forward, one's a defender, what have you. Some will start to understand the notion of playing within that shape and start to get the idea of passing the ball to teammates. Some might not be quite there yet. That's okay. Some kids get there faster than others. So I think you can start to introduce the notion of shape and positions, but I wouldn't sweat it too much if some of your kids are still chasing the ball wherever it goes and just not getting it. That will come in time. The next slide talks about a typical practice session for this age group. Most likely, I think if you get an hour, maybe an hour and 15 tops, you've done pretty well there. Like the kindergarten and younger kids, I think the main focus at this age is still just becoming comfortable with a soccer ball at your feet, whether it's controlling the ball, dribbling the ball, kicking the ball, whatever it is, and to get to that level, you need to touch the ball and practice with the ball as often as possible. So I think most of your practices should involve every player having a ball at their feet most of the practice. So any activities that you do, you might do some activities that involve the kids working in pairs, and obviously they're sharing a ball, but for a lot of the rest of them, it should just be one kid with their ball. Although we do recommend that at the end of your practice, you try and finish with a little small-sided game, whether it's 3v3, 4v4. Obviously you're only using one ball within that, but it's always a good idea to end practice with an actual game or scrimmage or whatever you want to call it. So that's how we'd suggest running a practice for this age group. What other things to consider would be, again, they're still young kids, so if it's not fun, they'll check out and they'll be done. We've got to try and make it as fun and enjoyable as possible, and do whatever it takes to keep these kids engaged and buzzing and really enjoying it and not wanting practice to end. There's a few other things up there that you can read yourself, but I think also we might be getting to the point here where you're wanting to do little team talks at the end of practice and after a game, which is fine, but I would suggest that you just keep in mind the attention span and make them short and sweet. Particularly after a game, you know, the kids have forgotten the score, most kids anyway, have forgotten the score within seconds or minutes of the final whistle going, and they're more concerned about getting cookies or ice cream or whatever afterwards, and we as coaches are thinking about it lying in our bed that night. So I would kind of avoid post-match talks being too long, just a few bullet points, high fives, great job, see you practice next week, that kind of thing. And if you do any team talks, whether it might be at practice or at half-time in a game, a lot of kids tend to be very visual learners, so if you've got a little whiteboard you can use, or even just chucking your cones down in the shape of a diamond that you're playing in the field, and asking questions about what would happen if the ball's here, where might these players go, that kind of thing. It's always a good idea to use those tools rather than just talking. That the visual sense of it will help engage the kids, and they'll pick up on it a bit more. In terms of rules for the 4v4, at this point you now get referees in your games. Keep in mind these refs at this age group tend to be very young children themselves, maybe 12 years old. Normally they've come through playing in the rec program themselves, some of them playing our competitive club teams, what have you. But as a 12-year-old kid refereeing a game, they're pretty inexperienced, so they'll make mistakes. And as you can imagine, as a 12-year-old, it can be a little intimidating when you've got a bunch of adults on each sideline yelling and shouting. So keep that in mind, keep the perspective. But coaches are now not allowed on the field of play. They've got to stay on the sidelines. So if this is your field here, you'd have the parents down this sideline, one team would be here, another team would be here. Coaches must stay off the field unless the referee asks you to come onto the field to attend to an injured player, for example. That would be the only reason you would go on the field. The rules to be aware of: there's no offsides, all free kicks are indirect, there's no yellow cards, there's no slide tackling allowed at this age. Sometimes kids will accidentally slide tackle, the ones that are maybe a little more intense. I don't sweat it if they do that. The referee should hopefully call it, but I've never seen anybody this age maliciously go in with a crazy sliding tackle. That just doesn't go through a kid's mind at that age. So it's a rule, you're not supposed to do it. If they do it, free kick and we'll play on. No throw-ins, so it's just kick in from the sideline. And couple of key ones are if it's a goal kick, so the blue team have kicked it out here, it's red's goal kick, the blue team have to retreat to behind the halfway line. And the idea behind that is so that we're encouraging the kids to practice building possession from beside their own goal and trying to work their way down the field in possession, as opposed to just booting it down the field and hoping for the best. That we don't want to encourage that. We're not really teaching the kids how to play. So the idea here might be if this player's taking a goal kick, maybe they play a pass here or a pass out here, and it just gives them 2 or 3 seconds before the onslaught comes. And so now we're practicing, as I say, can we pass the ball to a teammate, pick our head up, and maybe connect another teammate and work our way down the field. So that's the idea behind the players retreating there, is just to allow that opportunity. The other key thing is there's no goalkeeper, so we shouldn't be telling one kid just to park in front of the goal and stay there. If the blue team are attacking and the ball's down this end of the field, everybody should be up, at least at the halfway line, helping attack, helping support the attack. If the ball starts to move down the field, for sure you would drop back, and maybe the player at the bottom of your diamond may well drop back to defend the goal because the other team are attacking the goal and you want to stop them scoring. So don't get confused if there's kids standing in front of the goal. They're not being a goalkeeper. A goalkeeper uses their hand. They're just trying to stop the other team scoring. All we're saying is that if your team are down here attacking, there shouldn't be one kid who's just back here stuck in front of the goal. That's really not much fun for that kid at all because they're not involved in the game. And if a coach is telling them to do that, that's the coach basically strategizing to try and win a game of 6-year-old recreational soccer at the expense of that kid's enjoyment and development, which is crazy, really. So sometimes that no goalkeeper rule gets a little, some people get a little confused by it. It's okay to defend your goal when you're being attacked, of course it is. You don't want the team to score. But as the ball moves down the field, everybody should move up and join in the attack. It's 4v4. All players should be involved in that attack. So hopefully that's fairly clear on the rules. And you know, the 4v4 at this age group, a lot of these 4v4 games, there can be some pretty high score lines, particularly if one team's got a particularly dominant player. They could score 6, 7, 8 goals easy in a game. So scores can get a little lopsided in 4v4. If that starts to happen, there's absolutely no harm in, if you're up by 4 or 5 goals, saying to their coach, hey, throw a fifth player on, make it 5v4, let's make a game of it. No harm in doing that at all. So we'd rather see that than see a team crushing somebody 15-0. It's not much fun for anybody, particularly the team that are just getting smashed. And in the name of recreational soccer, we'd rather avoid, if we can manage games so that kids are not feeling extremely embarrassed and humiliated and deflated walking away from a game at 6 years old, we should avoid that. So we can manage games, whether it's doing stuff like maybe you've got a 4 or 5 goal lead. You can say to your players at the end of the quarter, or the end of the game, or half time rather, or end of the quarter, hey, listen, see if you can score with your left foot or your weaker foot, or you know, can we try and connect 4 passes before we score? Things like that allow you to challenge your players to get better, but at the same time, it lessens the embarrassment for the opponent if it's a lopsided game. So let's keep things in perspective, try and make it enjoyable for all the kids out there playing, and hopefully, let's say, that if we can, if most folks are on the same page there, it should be an enjoyable season for everybody. So thank you for watching this video, and let us know if you've got any questions on coaching first and second grade.